Okay. Just wanted to do a little update leading on from my last video about the state of the MMORPG industry. And one of the biggest issues, kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to MMORPGs, is what's done with MMORPGs to keep them alive and going, and fundamentally why the industry is in a bit of a drought, and why do MMOs keep struggling to keep their player base. And from a lot of kind of what I see a lot of in the past and what I see a lot of still now is this whole thing of MMOs that keep doing updates. And you think, okay, great, the MMOs, they're getting loads of updates, they're doing their best to keep players, but actually these updates are great, but they don't increase the size of a player base. They just literally are damage control for the most part, in terms of just slowing down a dwindling player base. And I'll get into why. And it's in summary, it's the whole type of the updates done to MMORPGs, and that is that they add more content without improving or evolving the mechanics or the gameplay. So every time we see an update to something, and this goes for most type of games, but this is what MMORPGs suffer from the most, is that every time you see an update, what do we get? We get a new class, or a new dungeon, or a new part of the world. And fundamentally, what's changed? Well, when you get a new part of the world, what do we get? Oh, it's a new ice map. Oh, it's a new desert map, jungle. So groundbreaking, guys. And what do you do when you're in that new environment? Oh, it's basically what I've been doing for the past 500 hours, but I'm just doing it now in a desert, guys, now, instead of on some grass. That's right. And even with, and that's kind of what most of the updates are. And if we go from there more into what actually improves gameplay, you have maybe new dungeons, but how much of that does it actually change the gameplay again? You get a boss with high HP and you just keep banging the crap out of it. And every now and again a new dungeon might add kind of a new aspect to the gameplay, like a new way to avoid traps, or the boss might have a new mechanic. So, but it's kind of like pretty small in the grand scheme of things when it comes to trying to maintain a player base. That's interesting. And just this video now. So, and another thing, so we've got the environments that is all about new models, new 3D production, new music. Great. And then we have what I call kind of like a middle ground attempt at changing up the gameplay. So things like new dungeons that might add a slightly new mechanic, or a new class that might have something like teleportation, or they might be able to jump really higher, or move a bit faster, or be able to do something a bit different with the enemy, like grab them and throw them to the ground. And you're like, oh my god, I didn't just punch an enemy in the face for the last 2 years now, I can grab them instead. So that's kind of like middle ground stuff. But what do MMORPGs do over the course of their lifetime to kind of refresh the gameplay? And it's very little, from what I can tell. So, and why is that? Because an MMORPG has so much investment. It's almost like they put all their money in it to program the foundations of the gameplay at the beginning, and then it spends the next 10, 15, or 20 years, if you're lucky like World of Warcraft. They go from being a video game studio to a 3D modeling studio. Once the developers have put the groundwork in, we just keep getting new costumes, enemies that look different, the environment looks different. But what are the developers done? Have they just been chewed up and spat out after the game studio's like, oh, we've built the base game, let's just turn into what's essentially a 3D modeling studio where we just keep churning out new assets, but the gameplay itself doesn't change. I mean, I'm assuming that the developers have a bit of work to do in terms of making sure it integrates fine and isn't buggy into the game. But like, where's these changes that can help reinvent the game? I mean, when an MMORPG is aims to be around for at least several years, and in terms of especially like with World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2 and ESO. What are they doing long term to make sure their game just doesn't slowly die? One of the biggest examples is ESO. It's got this new Greymore expansion coming out, and I just look at it and go, how is this bringing me back into the game? How is this shaking up the gameplay or the mechanics? Am I just seeing more enemies to button bash against? And when a game, and so many people have criticized the combat, why aren't these studios in the background getting the developers to kind of refresh those foundations? Because after a few years, whether you keep adding content, which is what most updates are, just more content, the game is still getting stale. And the reason why you get a dwindling player base over so many years, and MMORPGs were just kind of like, they're just slowly dying over time, is because new games are constantly coming out and reinventing what a video game is. And that's why they go to a MOBA or they go to a battle royale game, because it's new, fresh gameplay. So you might think, oh, MMORPGs, their only competition are ever MMORPGs, but it's not. It's every single game out there that's refreshing what it means to play a video game and how, as a player, interact with what you see on the screen. And MMORPGs don't do that. I mean, is ESO, for example, working in the background, got a bunch of developers thinking, oh, let's work over the next year or two towards totally revamping the combat in a way that feels modern and fresh? Probably not. Have they got that going? Probably not. And why not? Is it because they are just going, okay, that's a big investment and we're just going to get as much as we can out of this game now and milk it by just keep adding more 3D assets, more models basically, and that's it. And when it does eventually die in 5 or 10 years time, then that's an excuse to bring out a new MMORPG with new mechanics. I mean, I'm guessing that's just the way it works. I mean, I'm guessing revamping what might be considered foundational gameplay of an existing game is not worth the effort in the money. So they put all of that into maybe a new game to bring new hype. It's the only reason I can think. But at the same time, it's what makes these MMORPGs a stale genre, because the life cycle is so slow in terms of updating their gameplay, because we have to rely on MMORPGs that came out 10 plus years ago keep us entertained without the gameplay essentially being innovative basically. I mean, there's some good examples of it that I've seen. So I was really impressed with Guild Wars 2 and the new mounts in the expansion, because the game didn't have mounts for years and years and years. They brought out the mounts, and not only were the mounts just somewhere to get somewhere quicker, they let you interacted with the old content in different ways. So you can glide over water, jump really high to previously areas you previously couldn't get to, even in the old parts of the world. So it's revamping old content, and that's what you need to do. In classes, adding new classes might do that a bit, because you've got a new kind of way to do combat and interact with the environment potentially if that like class can teleport or maybe jump and stick to a wall. But it makes me miss, and this sounds like an old gamer rant again, but what we miss and what was easier in older games is how older games did fundamentally change up a lot more how the gameplay was. So for example, on a simple level, we had Sonic 1. And Sonic could run, and he could curl up in a ball and spin dash and fly off fast. And it's like when they brought out Sonic 2, it was, wow, they added Tails, and all of a sudden it was a massive jump in innovation, because it went from being co-op mode, even though Tails didn't really have much of an impact. It was essentially co-op mode, where Tails could pick Sonic up and fly to new areas. And that opened up. So it opened up all those like zones you've already been to, like Green Hill Zone style ones and things like that. And all of a sudden you could interact with the game in a totally new way, in its content. And in Sonic 3, revamped it up again and innovated by having Knuckles, who could glide and stick to walls. So all of a sudden you're going essentially over the same content that's got a different skin or theme or aesthetic or whatever you want to call it, but you're interacting with your environment in a totally new way. So kind of this original Sonic trilogy is a great example of how each time they've totally innovated, and it's just that fundamental kind of approach that isn't happening with MMORPGs. So I mean, this is a bit of a kind of like ramble. I didn't really plan on what I was saying. But that's kind of my thoughts on it, and it's there's no solution to it. There's no kind of mystery about why it's happening, because developers getting to recode the foundations of a game is not usually worth it, and you can usually just keep adding content in new zones without changing up the gameplay. You can keep a game going for several years, and I guess they just want to save all of the new gameplay mechanics and ideas for whenever they release a new MMO, rather than innovating the existing one. So I mean, it makes me think, like, where is ESO and Guild Wars 2 going to go from here? They've been around for so many years now, to the point where, understandably, players are going, well, is Guild Wars 3 on the horizon? Like, what's the game plan there? And even if the gamers don't realise it, the reason why they're slowly thinking, hang on, is there a new game, is not just because of how long Guild Wars 2 has been out, but it's because no matter how many new cosmetics they add and how many new raids, the fundamental gameplay isn't changing. So the player base is going to slowly dwindle, and the only way that MMORPG player bases don't dwindle is if one game really screws up, one MMO, and then they decide to jump ship to another one. For example, with World of Warcraft to Guild Wars 2 and ESO. So that's it for now, guys. That was just my rambling that I wanted to get off my chest. It felt like a bit of an elephant in the room. I haven't seen anyone really cover it before, but that is what I wanted to say today. What do you think? Is there any sort of substance to what I'm saying? I'd like to think so, but sometimes it's difficult to know, how much on the ball I am with these things, because at the end of the day, I'm just one guy in a room that's played a lot of MMOs for a long time, and sometimes knowing the line between what's me being jaded and what is what can be improved with the industry kind of gets a bit blurry. But until next time, over and out.